In a world older than memory, older than kingdoms, older than the first word ever spoken between two souls, the moon made a law. Every creature born beneath her light would be bound, tethered, called. They call it the mate bond. To the hopeful, it is destiny. To the faithful, it is grace. To the broken, it is a leash. For centuries, the strongest alpha to ever walk the mortal and supernatural world has stood above all others. He has never knelt, never surrendered, never wept. His name is spoken in councils as a warning, in battlefields as a curse, in whispers as something older than fear. Devon, Alpha Supreme, cursed by the moon herself. No mate, no bond, no tether to another soul, until the night the moon broke her own silence and sent him something far more dangerous than a mate. She sent him the truth. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, like, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lycan King romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The Cursed Alpha. The Ashenvale Forest, 3 hours past midnight. Devon moves through the trees like something predatory, unhurried, inevitable. The forest parted for Devon the way water parts for stone, not from welcome, from fear. The trees were ancient here, older than most of the packs that had lived and died beneath their canopy. Their roots ran deep into soil that remembered blood. Their bark bore the scars of Lycan wars stretching back centuries. And yet even they leaned away from him. Lucas followed 3 steps behind, as he always did. Close enough to serve, far enough to survive. Lucas. Alpha Supreme. Devon did not stop. His aura pressed outward like a tide. It was heavy tonight, heavier than Lucas had felt it in years. The kind of weight that meant something had shifted in Devon's inner world. Something seismic. Lucas. The Eastern Council sent another summons. They've been waiting 3 days. Aldrich says, silence. Only the crunch of leaves, the crack of a branch. The distant sound of the river that divided Devon's territory from lands no pack dared claim. Lucas. Devon. He stopped. Slowly. The way mountains stop avalanches. When he turned, his eyes had changed. Not gold the way most alphas' eyes glowed when their wolf was close to the surface. Gold implied warmth, implied sunlight. Devon's eyes were the color of a solar eclipse, are dark at the center, burning at the edges, something ancient looking out through mortal sockets. Devon. Aldrich can wait another 3 centuries. Lucas swallowed. Lucas. Then, where are you going? A pause. Long enough that Lucas thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Devon. To find what the moon has decided to do with me tonight? Lucas blinked. His breath came short. Lucas. Is it a mate? Devon said nothing, but the silence was an answer. Lucas. Devon. That's not possible. The council declared the bond severed. The Ashvara curse, Devon, was placed by a witch who underestimated what I am. Lucas's voice dropped low, urgent. Lucas. What if she's human? A slow beat. Devon turned and walked on. Devon. Then she is mine. Human, Lycan, something else entirely. It does not change what she is. Lucas. And if she doesn't want... Devon. Lucas. The name was a full stop. Final. Dangerous. Devon. The moon doesn't ask permission. He disappears into the darkness between the trees. Lucas stands frozen, watching the shadow swallow his alpha whole. Somewhere, far away, a girl drops a glass. The girl who didn't believe in love, Mirren's Crossing, a small town nestled between the Ashenvale Mountains and the Mist Vale. Alice Reed's apartment on the 4th floor, 3:17 a.m. Alice believed in 3 things: evidence, reason, herself. Everything else, fate, love, destiny, the divine plan of any higher power that might be watching, was a story people told themselves when the truth was too ugly to hold. She learned that at 12 years old. Standing in a hospital hallway in soaked clothes, a woman she'd never met kneeling to her eye level and saying the words, "There was nothing we could do, sweetheart. The accident was very sudden." Accident. Such a clean word for such a devastating thing. She stood at her window now, 23 years old and still just as hollow as she'd been that night, and watched the moon with the particular kind of loathing that can only develop from a long, intimate relationship. "Alice, you're not special. You're just a rock." The moon didn't answer. It never did. But it hung there in the sky with that infuriating silver certainty, as though it knew something she didn't. She hated that feeling, the knowing without knowing, the sense that something was approaching her life from a direction she couldn't see. She'd had it for 3 days now, a low-grade hum beneath her sternum, like a tuning fork someone had struck and pressed against her ribs. She'd tried caffeine, exhaustion, a particularly brutal 5-mile run at 11 p.m. Nothing killed it. Now she stood at the window with cold tea going colder in her hand, replaying the last conversation she'd had with her therapist a year ago. "Alice, do you think it's possible that you've built walls not to protect yourself from hurt, but from hope?" She had smiled tightly, paid the session fee, and never gone back. Hope was a more sophisticated trap than pain. Pain at least told the truth about itself. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. Beneath her, the town was still. Mirren's Crossing went to sleep early and rose late, a mountain town rhythm, unhurried, self-contained. The kind of place nothing happened in. The kind of place Alice had chosen specifically because nothing happened in it. And then it hit her, not slowly, not gradually, all at once. A pull so severe it stole the breath from her lungs, deep in her chest, deep in something beneath her chest, beneath her sternum, beneath her biology, in whatever dim corner of her held something older than science. She gasped, her hand pressed flat against the window. It felt like being called home to a home she'd never had, like a compass needle swinging violently north, like waking up, like being found. Alice stepped back from the window. Alice. No. Out loud, firm, to herself, to the moon, to whatever supernatural nonsense had apparently just decided to take up residence in her ribcage. Alice. No. She set the cold tea down. She went to bed. She did not sleep. The pull doesn't stop. If anything, as the night deepens, it grows stronger. The meeting. The edge of Mirren's Crossing. Devon enters the town's perimeter. The streetlights flicker. Dogs go silent. The wind changes direction. His wolf was screaming. Devon had never heard it like this. In 37 years of existence, in a life that had included battles that reshaped pack hierarchies, war councils that lasted weeks, the slow volcanic grief of watching every person he'd grown close to leave or be taken. He had never felt his wolf like this. Frantic, reverent, certain. She's here. The bond was not yet completed. It required acknowledgement from both sides. The ancient law of the mate tether demanded consent, at least in its final form, but the recognition, the pull, that required nothing but proximity. And she was close. Close enough that Devon could feel the shape of her through the bond's raw, unformed thread. Could feel the jagged edges of a heart that had been broken and rebuilt badly. Could feel intelligence, sharp and defensive. Grief, old and carefully buried. And beneath all of it, power, dormant, unrecognized, waiting. Lucas. Devon, we're in the middle of a human settlement. If your aura slips, Devon, it won't. He pulled it inward with practiced precision. The oppressive weight that had been bending the trees retreated. To a human, he would look like nothing more than a very tall, very composed man walking down a quiet street at 3 a.m. To Lucas, he looked like a man walking towards something that might unmake him entirely, and doing it without breaking stride. 4th floor, window overlooking the street, one lamp burning. Devon stopped beneath her building, looked up, and felt the bond slam into him like a physical blow. There she was. He couldn't see her clearly, not from this angle, but he didn't need to. The bond knew her, had apparently always known her, in whatever way bonds exist before they are formed. It sang recognition. Mine. The word wasn't possessive in the way Lucas feared. It wasn't the ownership of a tyrant. It was something older and quieter and far more devastating. Mine the way a star is mine to navigate by. Mine the way a wound is mine to carry. Mine the way the truth is mine once I've heard it. Impossible to unknow. Within upstairs, Alice has just gone to bed. Her eyes are closed. The pull is everywhere. Then she heard the knock. 3 sounds. Slow, deliberate, spaced exactly far enough apart that each one landed in its own silence. Alice lay very still. Nobody knocked on her door at 3 a.m. Nobody knocked on her door at all. She had arranged her life specifically to avoid that. Work from home, groceries delivered, social contact managed to a careful minimum. Knock, knock, knock. The pull in her chest lurched toward the door with the enthusiasm of something that had been waiting a very long time. She got up. She told herself she was going to look through the peephole, see nothing, and go back to bed. She reached the door. Her hand found the handle, and before she could stop herself, she opened it. The world took a breath and held it. He was tall, catastrophically so, built the way mountains are built, like the world simply accumulated mass around a point of gravity and called it a person. Dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been carved with particular intention, eyes, his eyes. They were looking at her the way she had always, secretly, desperately not hoped to be looked at, as though she were not a problem to be managed or a person to be tolerated, but the single most significant thing in a very long life of significant things, as though she were the answer. Alice's entire carefully constructed interior architecture cracked straight down the middle. She didn't show it. 23 years of practice. Devon, I found you. His voice was low, quiet. It didn't need to be loud. Alice, you have the wrong apartment. She moved to close the door. His hand came up, not forcefully, just enough. His palm against the door frame. Not blocking, asking. Devon, Alice Reed. She went very still. Alice, how do you know my name? Devon, the same way I know everything about this moment, the same way you know, right now in this second, that I'm not a stranger. A terrible silence. Because he was right. He wasn't a stranger. He felt like the opposite of a stranger. He felt like something she'd been trying to forget for a very long time without ever having met him. Alice, I don't know what you want. Devon, yes you do. The rejection of fate. Alice's apartment doorway. The hallway light is flickering. Neither of them moves. She let him in. She told herself it was because refusing felt more dangerous than accepting. A strategy, not a surrender. He stepped inside and looked at her apartment the way a person looks at a room that holds evidence of a life, carefully without judgment. Books stacked in alphabetical order, photographs conspicuously absent, a single plant on the windowsill that was thriving against all reasonable expectation. She stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Alice, say what you have to say. Devon, you felt it the moment I entered the town. Not a question. Alice, I don't know what you're talking about. Devon, your chest, here. He pressed 2 fingers briefly to his own sternum. Devon, like something pulling, insistent, impossible to explain. Silence. Alice's jaw was tight. Alice, I had indigestion. Something moved in Devon's face. Almost like amusement. Devon, 3 days of indigestion? Escalating in intensity? Specifically directional? She said nothing. Devon, you know what it is. Alice, I know what you're implying it is, and what you're implying is insane. Devon, the mate bond is not insanity, it's the oldest law. Alice, it's a story. Sharp, definitive. Alice, Lycans aren't real. Fate isn't real. And whatever this is, whatever you are, it's not what I need in my life. Devon looked at her steadily. Devon, and yet you opened the door. The counter edge bit into her palms. She was gripping it. Alice, I opened the door to tell you to leave. Devon, and instead you let me in. Alice, strategically. Devon, Alice, just her name, nothing else. Mara, but something in the way he said it, like he'd been practicing it his whole life without knowing why, almost unmade her. Devon, I'm not here to force anything. The bond doesn't work that way. I'm here because the moon has spent 37 years building a path that led to you, and I would be a fool to pretend I'm not going to follow it. She made herself meet his eyes. Mistake. Alice, and if I say no? A long pause. Something moved through his expression that she filed away to examine later. Pain? Acceptance? Both. Devon. Then I leave. Alice. Just like that? Devon. I said I'm not here to force anything. She studied him, looking for the catch, for the lie buried in the reasonable surface. Alice. What happens to you if I say no? He didn't answer immediately. And Devon knew nothing good. The honesty of it disarmed her. She looked away. Alice. I need you to go. Devon stood. He crossed to the door without protest. No manipulation, no plea. Just the quiet dignity of someone who had made a promise and intended to keep it. His hand was on the frame when she spoke again. Alice. What's your name? He looked back over his shoulder. Devon. Devon. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut. Alice stood in the silence for 3 full seconds. Then her legs gave out. She didn't fall. She sank, carefully, deliberately, down until she was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, knees drawn up, staring at the closed door. The pull had not diminished with his departure. It had sharpened. Like a wound made visible by the thing that caused it walking away. She pressed her fist to her sternum, and for the first time in 11 years, Alice Reed cried, quietly, alone, without understanding why. The truth about her parents' Alice's apartment. 4:45 a.m. She has not gone back to bed. She sits in the kitchen, and then she remembers. The box. She had found it when she was 19, 3 months after moving into this apartment, wedged beneath the false bottom of the trunk that had followed her from the foster system to adulthood, carrying the only things she had left of a life that ended when she was 12. A small wooden box, sealed with a lock she'd never managed to open. She'd tried harder after her first year at university when she'd taken a lock-picking module on a dare and discovered she was dangerously good at it. But this lock, this one, had resisted everything, until tonight. She crossed to the trunk, lifted it, found the box. Her hands shook. The lock clicked open at her touch, as though it had been waiting, as though it had always been waiting for tonight. Inside, documents, dozens of them, folded, creased, handled so many times the paper had gone soft at the edges. Photographs, maps with handwritten markings, jars containing things she chose not to examine closely, and beneath all of it, a journal, her mother's handwriting on the cover. For Alice, when the moon calls. Her breath left her. She opened it. My darling, if you're reading this, it means the bond has been triggered. Nah, it means Devon found you, or you found him, or the moon finally got tired of waiting. I need you to understand something before the bond tells you the story its way. Your father and I were hunters, but not the kind they tell stories about. We weren't heroes. We weren't moral crusaders. We were people who made terrible choices because we loved something more than we loved our own safety. We loved you. Alice's hands were not shaking anymore. They were very, very still. The way things go still when they're listening. The truth about Devon, he did not kill us the way you may have been told. The accident was real. The crash was real. But what caused it, what drove us onto that road in that rain at that hour, was us, our choices, our past. Well, we had spent years trying to understand the Ashvara curse, the ancient binding placed on Devon's bloodline, not to break it, not to free him, to prevent it from breaking naturally, because the curse is the only thing keeping you safe. What Devon doesn't know, what no one alive knows, is what you are. You are not human, my love. You are not Lycan. You are Vul, the bound opposite, the creature that the ancient prophecy says will complete what Devon's bloodline started. If the curse breaks and the bond forms fully, the power you carry will wake up. And when vile power wakes in an unformed host, it doesn't simply manifest. It chooses. It can heal the world Devon carries, or it can end it. We spent our lives trying to make sure you would never have to choose. I'm sorry we failed, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, we loved you first. Mom. The journal sat in her hands like a living thing. Alice stared at it for a very long time. Then she looked out the window at the moon. It stared back, infuriatingly certain, as though it had always known, as though it had planned all of this with the patience of something that measures time in centuries. Alice, you couldn't have just sent me a normal life, could you? She stood. She was going to find Devon. Not because the bond called her, not because fate demanded it, because she had questions, and she had spent her entire life without answers. That ended tonight. Confrontation and confession. The forest edge just outside Mirren's crossing. Devon hasn't left. He stands at the tree line as though he already knew she'd come. She found him where the town ended, standing with his back to the forest, face turned toward the mountains, a man who looked like he had never been uncertain of anything in his life. And yet when she approached and he turned, she saw something in his eyes that she recognized, because she saw it every morning in her own, the specific exhaustion of carrying something alone for too long. Alice, you knew about the curse. Not a question. Devon. Yes. Alice. And the Ashvara binding? A pause. Devon. What do you know about the Ashvara binding? She held up the journal. Something moved through Devon's face. Fast, complex. Several generations of composure put under significant pressure all at once. Devon. Where did you get that? Alice. My mother. She left it for me. For when the bond triggered. Devon's jaw was a hard line. Devon. Your parents didn't die in an accident. The ground held still. Alice. I know, his eyes met hers. Alice. They drove themselves into danger trying to keep me safe, trying to keep the bond from forming. I know what they were. I know what they were trying to do. She crossed the distance between them until she was close enough that the bond hummed like a live wire between their chests. Alice. What I don't know is, what do you want? Not what the bond wants. Not what fate says. You. Devon. What do you want? The question seemed to genuinely land on him differently than expected. He looked at her, really looked, with the expression of someone for whom that question had not been asked in a very long time. Perhaps ever. Devon. I want... He stopped. Might try it again. Devon. I have wanted for my entire existence to not be alone in what I carry, not a completed bond, not a tethered mate. Simply someone who understands that being the strongest thing in a room does not mean being immune to the weight of it. Alice stared at him. His expression didn't change, but he let her see it, whatever it was, the truth beneath the alpha, the weariness beneath the authority. He just let her see it, and something in Alice, which had been armored and locked and buried for 11 years, simply recognized it. Not the bond, not magic. Just two people who had been alone for a very long time, standing 3 feet apart in a pre-dawn forest. Alice. I think I'm Vael. Devon went absolutely still. Devon. That's not. Vael are mythological. Alice. So are Lycans. And here you are. A beat. And then Devon, who had not smiled in what felt like decades, made a sound at the back of his throat that was not quite a laugh, but was the architectural ancestor of one. Devon. Fair point. The war arrives 3 weeks later. The detente has held. Devon has remained in Mirren's Crossing. The bond has grown, carefully, consensually, at Alice's measured pace. And then, the hunters arrive. The first sign was the birds. Alice noticed it from her window, the sudden silence from the tree line, the way every creature that lived in the margins between town and forest went still at once. She'd lived here for 4 years. She'd never heard the forest go quiet. She picked up her phone. Alice. Something's wrong. Devon. I know, stay inside. Alice. Devon. Devon. Alice. Early inside. She watched from the window as Devon crossed the street below in 3 long strides. By the time he reached the tree line, Lucas and 4 others had appeared from the shadows and from the forest. 20 hunters, armed with silver, armed with the old compounds that disrupted Lycan healing, armed with the particular focused hatred of people who had been doing this a very long time. Leading them, a woman, 60 perhaps, silver-haired, a jaw like a blade, and eyes that reminded Alice with a sudden lurch of her own when she looked in the mirror. Her mother's sister, Eleanor Reed, the aunt she'd been told was dead. Eleanor, Devon Ashvale, Alpha Supreme, the moon's favorite monster. Devon's voice when it came was very quiet. Devon. Eleanor, I hope this would not be necessary. Eleanor. Necessary? Well, you're 200 yards from the Vale bloodline. If the bond completes, if her power wakes, you have no idea what you're unleashing. Devon. I have some idea. Eleanor. Then you know it needs to be prevented. A beat. Devon. Or guided. Eleanor's expression didn't shift. Eleanor. You'd gamble the world on a bond? Devon. I'd gamble the world on her. The silence that followed that was the most dangerous silence Alice had heard in her life, and then she was moving before she'd decided to move. Down the stairs, out the door, across the pavement, into the space between her mate and her aunt, with her hands raised and the pull in her chest burning so bright it almost made her stagger. Alice. Stop! Everyone stopped, including Eleanor, including Devon. When including whatever power had been quietly waking in Alice's marrow for 23 years, which had decided, apparently, that this was the moment. Because her eyes were glowing. Not gold, not wolf, something older, something neither human nor Lycan had a word for. The moon above turns the color of old blood. The forest goes absolutely still. The choosing the thrilling conclusion, 63 minutes to 75 minutes. The blood moon burns. Alice stands between 2 forces that have been circling this moment for a century. The Vale power is fully awake, and it is not subtle. The air between her palms crackles with silver-violet light. The ground beneath her feet does not tremble. It waits. This was the thing about power. Alice had read about it in academic contexts, had studied it in political theory, in history, when in the rise and fall of movements. Power was always framed as something external, something you were given or seized or had taken from you. Nobody had warned her that from the inside, real power felt like grief, like the universe handing you something fragile and enormous and saying, "This has always been yours. I was just keeping it safe." She could feel all of it. The hunters behind her aunt, their fear, their conviction, the long moral weight of a mission inherited from parents who inherited it from theirs. She did not hate them for it. She understood it. She had been shaped by the same loss. Devon at her right shoulder, not touching her, not standing in front of her, beside her. The way he had stood beside her every night for 3 weeks while she read her mother's journal and asked difficult questions and made no promises. The bond between them was a warm thread, not a chain. She had tested it enough times to know the difference. And Eleanor. Eleanor, who she'd been told was dead. Eleanor, who had her mother's cheekbones and her father's stubbornness and 20 years of desperate, misguided love written into every line of her face. Eleanor. Alice. Sweetheart, listen to me. What's in you? It isn't a gift. It's a weapon. The ancient scrolls call the vial the ender of ages, the force that either restores or destroys what the Lycan bloodlines have built. There is no neutral option. There is no Alice. Eleanor, her aunt stopped, because Alice's voice was calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing panic. The genuine bedrock calm of someone who had just, in the last 90 seconds, understood something that changed all the geometry. Alice, you've been treating the prophecy like a machine. Insert vial, receive outcome, restore or destroy, as though I'm a coin to be flipped. Eleanor, that's what the vial are. Alice, the vial are people. I am a person. The silver-violet light between her hands shifted, deepened. It stopped crackling and began to breathe, to pulse, slowly, like a heartbeat, like something choosing. Alice, Mum said the power chooses. She didn't mean it chooses between restore and destroy. She meant it chooses based on who's holding it. Alice, and I have spent 23 years becoming someone who knows the difference between what's been broken and what only looks broken. She turned to Devon. He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her since the beginning, like the answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask. And Alice, well, what Devon's bloodline built, the pacts, the bonds, the old laws, they're not the problem. The problem is centuries of secrecy, hidden prophecies, people making choices for other people because they were afraid of what those people might choose. She looked at Eleanor. Alice, what happened to Mum and Dad? That was a tragedy, a real one. But it happened because people kept secrets instead of having conversations, because they were so busy trying to prevent a catastrophe that they created smaller ones. The power in her hands rose, soft and absolute. The blood moon above them began, slowly to change back, the red fading, silver returning. Eleanor, you don't know what you're doing. Alice, no. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing. She pressed one hand to her own sternum. She felt the veil power settle into her like water finding its level, not banished, not suppressed, chosen, hers, on her terms. And then she turned to Devon and held out her other hand. Not because the bond demanded it, not because fate was watching, because she had read every page of her mother's journal, and at the end of all that tragedy and sacrifice and love, the only thing that had actually survived was this. The truth was better than the secret, always, in every iteration. The truth, spoken with courage, was the only thing that had ever actually saved anyone. Devon looked at her hand, then at her. Then, he took it. The bond completes, not violently, not catastrophically, like a door opening that has been locked for a very long time, with the quietest, most final click. The power that wakes is not the ender of ages. It is something the prophecy forgot to account for, the power of a person who chose freely. Eleanor took a step back, her weapon lowered, not because she surrendered, because she saw, in Alice's glowing eyes, in Devon's expression, in the silver-violet light that settled around them both like a breathing second skin, something she had not seen since her sister was alive. Evidence. She saw evidence that maybe the choice hadn't needed to be prevented. Maybe the choice had only ever needed to be trusted. The moon finishes its return to silver. The forest exhales. One by one, the hunters lower their weapons. Lucas, behind Devon, sits down on a log and puts his head in his hands with the air of a man who has survived something he's not yet processed. Devon spoke quietly, just to her. Devon, are you all right? Alice thought about it, genuinely. Her parents were still gone. That grief didn't vanish because she'd understood it better. Eleanor was alive. That was complicated in ways she'd be unpacking for years. The supernatural world had apparently known about her existence for longer than she'd been alive, and there was an entire architecture of secret history she needed to dismantle and rebuild with honesty. And yet, She was standing in a forest in the pre-dawn dark, holding the hand of a man who was something ancient and impossible, and looking at her like she was the only fixed point in his century-long orbit. And the pull in her chest was not foreign anymore. It was hers. She looked up at him. Alice, I'm going to need at least 6 months to process all of this. Devin waited. Our Alice, well, but yes, I think I'm going to be all right. His hand tightened slightly around hers. She let it. Above them, the moon burns clean and cold and silver, exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will. Patient, certain, watching the things it has arranged come together the way they were always going to. End of part 1, part 2. The Reckoning, coming soon.